Indiana Jones, Indiana It's a podcast about Indiana Jones. Every movie, 1 minute at a time. Indiana Jones Minute.
Welcome back to the Indiana Jones Minute, the daily podcast in which we get right to the heart of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, 1 minute at a time. I'm Pete Mummert.
I'm Tom Taylor.
I'm Jerry Porter.
And today we're joined once again by W Rinsler, author of The Complete Making of Indiana Jones and The Making of Star Wars, both indispensable books that I think belong on the shelves of any Indy or Star Wars fan. Welcome back. Thanks for joining us again, Jonathan.
Well, thanks for having me. First minute was fun.
This won't be even better.
Yeah, hopefully. Yeah. And we're here to discuss minute 10, which begins with Indy doing a really wonderful homage to Esther Williams as he dives headfirst onto the parquet dance floor. It moves on to him doing a fairly passable Axl Rose shimmy with some of the club dancers. Moves on to have him playing some drum cymbal frisbee with a man dressed all in black, and ends with a good old-fashioned pink and white balloon fight.
Geez, Pete, I can't follow that. That was beautiful. I do have a question, and Jonathan brought this up last minute, actually. And at the very beginning of this minute, I wondered, is the orchestra kind of winking at us? Are they, because we all just witnessed a restaurant patron get impaled with pigeon flambe.
Yeah.
And is that why they suddenly break into Anything Goes? Just sort of as a little like, hey, watch what happens.
Well, yeah, as much as the movie itself was winking at us when it started the movie with Anything Goes, I think. Hey, it's going to be an Indiana Jones rumpus ride. Anything goes.
Well, and the interesting thing is, Jonathan, as you mentioned, the band is actually providing the music for the Madcap Fracas.
Yeah, at a certain point, the John Williams music fades out, and they start playing their number. I think the idea is that it's whatever it is. It's 9:45 or 10:20 p.m. and it's time for the second. It doesn't matter how many people are on fire or being punched. In the 30s and anything goes.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, just as a musician myself, I've seen a lot of crazy things on gigs, but I haven't ever broken into Anything Goes when somebody gets slammed into the stage. Although it is inspiring.
Yeah, remember that.
Yeah, I would consider that.
So, we cut to Indy and Willie are crawling towards each other on the floor. Indy's yelling the antidote, and Willie's yelling, "Where's the diamond?" And they kind of both get disgusted at each other and crawl on their own separate ways. And at this point, the dancers start to come out of the dragon's mouth, and they see Indy doing that invisible hula hoop move, and they start screaming.
Yeah.
And Jonathan, I'm actually super excited to have you on for this minute, because you had some really cool stuff in your book talking about sort of an early version of this, what they were going to do.
You'll have to remind me.
Well, I think you were talking about how Indy actually went into the dragon's mouth, and there was some kind of a lever that he pulled, and the dragon started shooting fire out of its mouth and burned all of these guys chasing him.
Was that in the early script?
Yeah, that was in the early script, yeah.
Yeah, I forgot about that. That would have been cool.
Well, and I guess what they did is they just replaced that with a cymbal frisbee.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's always a little bit of blue sky when they're doing those scripts. And, they had like twice as many chases as they needed for Raiders. And in fact, the whole, as you guys know, the mine car chase was recycled from Raiders into. So yeah, there's always other stuff. I think Short Round was supposed to be in the scene too. He was actually in the shooting script. He was going to be in the club at some point, and they cut out that scene.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Do you know if he had like a role, if he was doing anything, or was he just kind of watching what was going on?
I don't have the script with me, so I'd have to go back. I don't have access to those anymore.
He was in the place of Wuhan and he got shot.
I think maybe he would explain why he knew that he had to bring the car around.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a good point. That's kind of handy.
Yeah.
But I was going to ask you guys, have you ever seen the movie, the Boris Karloff movie that came out in the 30s called Mask of Fu Manchu?
No, I haven't.
I don't think I have either.
It's worth seeing on the DVD version. It's so politically incorrect.
Sure.
It's amazing. But it's clearly something that these guys, Spielberg and George, screened, when they were doing this, because it's very much like it's stuff that inspired Indiana Jones.
Uh-huh.
And in particular, when I watched it the other day on TMC, and then rewatching this, I think that it's shades of Fu Manchu, basically.
Huh, interesting. I definitely have to check that out now.
But, more politically correct, although not that much. I mean, they still in this movie.
It's definitely a sliding scale.
Yeah, right.
We it's funny you mention that, because discussing this movie minute by minute, we do kind of run up against some issues, I guess, with regards to that, and just I guess the treatment of I don't know, the treatment of it, not exactly politically correct.
Yeah, it's not. The villains here are basically throwbacks to 1930s style villains, and and particularly once they get, I know we're not at that minute yet, but once they get into the Temple of Doom, it becomes very much so that. And
Mm-hmm.
and there was a fair amount of people being upset when the movie came out.
Yeah.
Not to mention the violence too. And if you watch the Boris Karloff movie, it is unbelievably violent for 1932.
Wow.
Yeah. Also with sort of sexual depravity and you name it.
Huh.
Do tell.
It's still 1932, but
Yeah.
given what they're hinting at and everything, it blew my mind. I was really surprised, and for a long time you could only see that movie in a censored version, because rightfully so, Asian Americans were outraged by it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's interesting that in 1984 they could say, "Oh, we're doing a throwback to the way races were treated in the 30s," but even just I'm not going to do the math, but 30 or 40 years later, that would never fly now. You couldn't just say, no, I'm doing it like they did in the 30s. It's cool.
Right.
There would have been a lot more uproar, I'm sure.
There was still enough. Yeah, there was still enough of, I don't know what you'd call it, momentum from the 1930s to ride that wave.
Yeah.
But now it's no longer around. You can't get on that wave anymore.
Right.
Well, and when the bad guys in Raiders of the Lost Ark, when the bad guys are Nazis, everybody gets a pass on Nazis.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The Nazis might have complained, but who was listening?
Yeah.
Well, Jer, I have to ask you,
Uh-oh.
as a you mentioned that you're a musician. Do you prefer musician, drummer, or percussionist to describe yourself?
Oh, well, drummers are notoriously treated as the family dog
Yeah, okay.
in
so
a
drummer.
band. We all know it's like everybody's like, well, get in the Christmas picture. That's lovely. Come on up, and they pet you on the head and they feed you the scraps under the table.
Sure.
But there's never actually a seat for you at the table.
Yeah.
So I think with that in mind, they are vehement about being called a musician.
Okay. So
The
reason I asked, you probably know where this is going. If you threw a cymbal at a guy's face, no matter what kind of cymbal it was, would you expect it to make this kind of sound?
Well, I will read to you exactly what I've written on my notes.
All right.
That would absolutely kill to get hit in the face with that cymbal. But they did do a decent job using a small cymbal like that, because it being 1935, That's right around the time that Gene Krupa and swing music is getting bigger, and cymbals needed to be made larger and larger and larger. But they weren't really at that point in 35. They didn't get bigger till, really Gene Krupa became more popular in the movies, and they needed larger cymbals to make more noise to cover over the big band horns. But so that actually is completely period accurate, that they used a little cymbal like that. And then it sounded accurate too, because I was complaining about the opening gong and how that's not how that gong would have sounded. Right. But that is what that cymbal would sound like. The only thing missing was you would have two crash noises. One where it splits the guy's face and it would crash, as it did, which was beautiful. It the sustain was a little too long on it, but it was good. And two, when the cymbal then hit the floor.
Oh, sure.
So it would have been like a
yeah. Well,
but A+ for the set designer.
There you go. -1 point for Ben Burt for not putting in the second.
Well, but he did get the sound. He did get apparently the right basic sound, right? I mean,
he did.
It's
yeah, he absolutely did.
It's
absolutely.
The kind of thing I would expect him to get right.
Yeah. Well, this is to be fair, this is the first time we've ever taken a point away from Ben Burt for anything.
He's got pretty much infinite points already. So
yeah.
Well, and at that point, I'd say if it's Ben Burt, the cymbal probably hit the guy in the face, he fell down, and then it probably landed on his soft, fleshy chest.
Yeah, he could explain to you why he intentionally didn't put that in.
Thus, muting the second crash.
Well, the thing Ben's always up against is that they're so, if the cuts are so fast, he has to respect the cutting energy and not have the sounds. Or sometimes, I guess it's a decision he has to make each time, is how does the sound relate to the film edit?
Right.
But it'd be fun. I did a book with him on the sounds of Star Wars. It'd be fun if we did one on the sounds of Indiana Jones.
Oh,
that'd
definitely.
Be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the sound he has here for the knives that are being thrown at Indy are great.
Oh, yeah. Are those knives? What exactly are those? They got like little things coming off them or something.
Oh, I'm not
like
sure.
Traditional martial arts weapons or something to me.
Yeah.
I don't know.
They almost look like they're pointy ended and they have like a blade coming off them or something. I don't know.
They looked exactly like the darts that come out of the wall in the Chachapoyan temple.
Not really.
Oh, come on. Give me I thought a little bit, right? No? They're a little bigger.
And they're shaped differently, too.
Are they? All right.
I did wonder if this was another piece of evidence in the Star Wars dream theory. So, Jonathan, one of our theories we've been examining is, are the Indiana Jones movies the fever dream Han Solo has while he's encased in carbonite? And I'm wondering, in this scene, you've got like several guys shooting at Indy at point blank range. And is this sort of him remembering stormtroopers? Because they all miss. And they all miss like perfectly, like a silhouette around his body.
It's possible that it's all a fever dream of Harrison Ford when he's smoking a huge amount of marijuana.
Yeah, easily. I never considered that, actually.
Which, of course, he would never do.
Of course. We're just making stuff up.
1 minute at a time.
Well, there is a very fever dream-like cut here. Is they throw the knives, and then Indy kind of does that frisbee toss of the cymbal back. And right before, as they're throwing the knives, the orchestra area here is completely filled. And then they cut to Indy, and they're all gone. And I kind of like this because it's very sort of a surreal, like it was sort of like, Tom, how you thought Tote was running away and jumping in his car at the end of Raiders. Like I just picture all of these guys like running off as soon as the knives come out, like their legs are doing like that tornado thing, or they all look like wheels.
Does anybody know what Indy says to Lau when they're, I don't know.
Well, P, you were saying there's the question that he's even speaking any kind of language earlier.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything I had seen, people were not able to decipher what he was saying. So, Jonathan, we were sort of toying with the idea that maybe Indy was pretending to speak Chinese, and Lau was kind of humoring him.
Are you sure? Have you got Mandarin or Cantonese native speakers to take a look at that?
I haven't actually. I need to ask some friends to take a look at this. Yeah, I'll see what we can get some more firsthand.
Yeah,
research.
my guess is because that's the kind of stuff they would definitely get right. It's either that or they're speaking some sort of ancient dialect, which is somehow related to the idol or the ashes.
Right.
Yeah.
I can't imagine they would get that wrong because they were really, in an odd way, even though it's total fantasy, but certain things they would want to get right. I think that'd be one of them.
Right.
And it's actually written out in the screenplay, at least an earlier version that I've seen.
Oh yeah, the actual dialogue.
But I can't tell if what is written down is what he's saying in the movie, and then I wouldn't know what it said anyway.
And it's also possible like Mandarin is notoriously difficult because it involves like tonal changes. Like the same word can be pronounced with 3 different tones and mean 3 different things. So I think it's, if you don't know any Chinese, it's probably really hard to reproduce.
One thing.
Well, we have.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to give sort of a shout out to the production design of these 2 minutes that we're looking at. I don't know if you guys already talked about that in another minute, but it's a great, sort of very simple but wonderful set. It's the kind of set you wish you could have visited.
Uh-huh.
The whole sort of Club Obi Wan.
Yeah. It's got that great parquet floor.
Well, and we talked a little bit about this too. I mean, there are shots with Indy that are very. He's framed in red, white, and blue, and I even saw a few of those in this minute too. And then when when we see Lau, he's in black or black and red, kind of traditional American verses.
That's right, Jerry. I agree.
Well, so Indy tosses this cymbal at the guy, and he falls into the ice bucket, the 2 ice buckets, and knocks him over. And I actually love this gag. I think it's great. Like, this is it just reminds me like something straight out of Buster Keaton or Harold Lloyd, where there's a prop that exists purely because it's hilarious. It's like the piano that's standing over the road, or like the guy's carrying the big piece of glass. It's like the perfect thing if someone's looking for a diamond are 2, ice buckets.
Right. That's pretty awesome. And then if that doesn't work, add balloons. Lots and lots of balloons. Which I guess, I don't know, we were saying that it seems like the band and it also seems like the dancers are just kind of like going by the clock. They're like, 9:30, time for swing, So maybe it's like, maybe the balloons were like, well, this is the point and anything goes where you drop the balloons, no matter what kind of fracas is going on.
Exactly.
Well, I wondered, is that how the end of Anything Goes is? Red, white, and pink balloons descend from the ceiling?
It didn't last time.
I think that's mandatory, yeah.
Yeah, I was wondering, is this like New Year's Eve, or is this because we spent a lot of time on Raiders trying to figure out what time of year it was?
No, it's just pre-TV. People had to go out and have fun.
Yeah, it's Friday.
So it's just 9:30. The balloons drop. Like you can set your clock by it.
Happy New Year every night.
Exactly.
So yeah, Indy kind of Willie screams. She sees the antidote. Indy yells for her to stay there, and suddenly she looks up, almost like she's in an ecstatic trance. But then you sort of realize she's heard the balloons being released.
Right.
And puts the antidote in the front of her dress, and suddenly the balloons start falling everywhere. And Indy runs in, and we get some really good face kicking and kind of general balloon fracas.
Yeah.
What's also amazing is that I went and refreshed my memory before we had this. I did read, like, the little I wrote about this in the book, and it reminded me that Harrison Ford was having a terrible back problem at the time.
Mm-hmm.
They shot this, and he actually was sent back to the States, and they started filming this whole thing with Kate Capshaw just doing her parts, and so he wasn't even around for a lot of the shots where we see just her.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah, and then and then they shut down for weeks, I believe, And then they came, Harrison Ford they had some very sort of dangerous and, I guess, forward progressive kind of treatment, which worked semi-miraculously, and he came back and they were able to shoot his parts. But then, Michael Kahn is such a great editor. They just edit it all together seamlessly. You'd never know that there might have been 3 weeks between her looking up and him looking at her.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's fantastic.
Movie magic.
Movie magic, exactly.
Oh, I wonder if that was marijuana. bad back.
Medicinal use.
Yeah.
Well, how much, Star Wars, is sort of famous for George Lucas would film a lot of stuff and then really start to put stuff together in the editing room. Was this more planned out, do you think, like scene by scene, like everything was storyboarded and they knew exactly what they were going for? Or did they do was it pretty creative with the editing, just sort of taking what they had?
For this scene, there was a lot of stuff storyboarded out for Temple of Doom. But, I think it's like anything, they get to the set and Spielberg is flexible. If you see something that's better or not working, the storyboards are a suggestion of what he was doing. It's different if second unit goes off and shoots it. Then they're really beholden to the storyboards.
Uh-huh.
But as far as I know, Spielberg shot most of this, or all of it, himself. But I'm feeling he just kind of, probably a mixture of things, storyboards and spontaneity. But unlike, George is different. I remember the first time I interviewed him, he said, I'm not a director. And I said, what are you talking about? And he says, no, he said, Steven is a director. He knows what he's doing. He's like, he didn't say like Hitchcock, but he's kind of like, he knows how it's going to sort of cut together in his head, and he's filming what he needs for that cut, and he'll do some safety, whereas George is really an editor at heart, and he edits his films. George, whoever's credited as an editor, for the most part, is just doing what George tells them to do. And whereas Spielberg, primarily, just in terms of relatively speaking, films what he needs for certain shots that can only go together in a certain way, and then Michael Kahn just sort of does it and shows it to him, and Spielberg makes changes, but Michael Kahn does the editing. It's different. That's why later Spielberg could go and shoot Schindler's List while Michael Kahn was editing Jurassic Park.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
George could never do that. George is in the editing room every day with the editor. So that's a long-winded answer to your question.
That's a good one.
Good.
Yeah, good answer. Yeah. I have a question for Jonathan. Just what would you say is some of the, I guess, the tonal color differences between Raiders and Temple of Doom?
Well, in terms of the feeling, everybody said, and those guys, and Steven Spielberg and George say that they were both going through a sort of a darker period in their lives. George was going through a divorce. I forget, but I think Spielberg was going through something like a breakup or something. Mm-hmm. And the movie is a lot darker, and in a way, originally they had envisioned, or particularly I think George had envisioned Indiana Jones as a darker character, sort of more of a Treasure of Sierra Madre, Humphrey Bogart, alcoholic, kind of washed up James Bond, who sort of is out there still doing these dangerous adventures, and a bit of, just barely on the right side of the law. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't really come off that way in Raiders, but in Temple, it kind of does. Fortune and Glory, they're not doing anything really good until he realizes that all these kids are being enslaved, and then he becomes more like the first film where he's freeing the kids. Mm-hmm. Again, that's a long-winded answer.
No.
That's the kind of stuff we wrestle with constantly on this show. Is like, who is Indiana Jones? What is he? Because we talked constantly during Raiders about how Yeah, that background of him, the treasure of the Sierra Madre, the kind of drunk, kind of jerk, womanizer kind of guy, and that the guy that we got was sort of came from that but didn't end up being that, but there's still shades of that in there in Raiders, it seems like. But then, yeah, I guess I always think in broad strokes of Temple of Doom of him being like more of like a, sort of gung-ho, kind of flawless hero kind of guy. But maybe you're right. I'm going to, just based on what you just said, I'm going to have to, that's going to skew my vision of him now from for the rest of this movie, and maybe in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, the I can't remember the exact chronology because I haven't watched it recently, but they go to the village and they're saying, all of our children have disappeared. Can you help us? And there's that scene with Short Round, and it's just Indy and Short Round, and he doesn't say, "This is our chance to do something good and free the children."
Right.
You realize what these rocks are worth, or something like that. It's kind of a dark moment, but some of it's kind of the dynamic between George and Spielberg, kind of, pushing and pulling during the script writing process. Mm-hmm. And if somebody could do an interesting dissection and say, well, that feels more like Spielberg and that feels more like Lucas, and it could be an interesting exercise.
Well, and something I've been thinking about is Lawrence Kasdan famously said that he passed on the script and working on Temple of Doom because he felt that the story, or he just felt that it was mean-spirited. And, I wonder, do you see that mean-spirited flavor in here?
Well, I don't know. I don't know which version of the script he read. I mean, at that, he already, to get him to do Jedi, was lucky. Kasdan was already out directing, and so to get him to work on any script was even a script that a project that he was really enthusiastic about would have been difficult because he had just moved on professionally. So, but there's probably some truth in that. And like I said, it is pretty dark, and and maybe he saw the sort of un-PC-ness of it as well. Like I don't want to write scenes with, the thuggies pulling people's hearts out of people's chests.
Right.
They're just in the movie I was mentioning, The Mask of Fu Manchu. The Fu Manchu shouts out, "Death to white men." Or death to all white people. These guys are just, but one sound bite away from that. So I don't know what was going through Larry Kasdan's mind. He did eventually come back and do a Star Wars movie, though.
That's true.
Yeah.
Maybe he'll come back and do an indie movie.
Well, maybe he just waited till everybody's love life had settled.
Yeah, all the divorces were done.
No, but it's fascinating. In Skywalker Sound, on Skywalker Ranch, there's a big building. It's called the Tech Building, and or it's also referred to as Sky Sound. And in the sort of cafeteria area, there's huge movie posters, and in the cafeteria area, there's this huge poster of Treasure of Sierra Madre, and you have Humphrey Bogart wearing this hat, right? Mm-hmm. And I would sometimes take people on tours, and I'd say, why is that poster in this area? And a few people would know it, but actually only I think one person. They got it right, which is that's because this is it's Sky Sound, Ben Burt, Indiana Jones, and it came from this hat that Bogart's wearing, in Treasure of Sierra Madre. That was if there's one inspiration, it was that movie. And he's not a very nice character in that movie.
No, he's not.
And I think in the earlier versions of Raiders of the Lost Ark, Marion was quite young when they first had their tryst.
It's debatable how old she ended up being during their tryst. Like, it seems like maybe she was still really young. They're not very clear about it, but yeah, we kind of wrestled with that too.
Yeah, I think the original idea was that he was kind of definitely overstepping his bounds as a grown-up.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
again, not very PC.
Right.
Well, especially imagine you're writing a story about the hero
Yeah.
who's doing that, you know.
Yeah.
The earliest thing you know about him is that.
That's why, again, I really recommend you guys see this movie, because it comes from, this sort of dark place, and the EC comics too, which those guys loved, which are to this day truly horrifying.
Yeah.
But it's make believe, so that's how they get away with it.
Yeah,
I guess.
One final thing I like in this minute is sort of this general melee is going on the entire time. That bald gong player is just standing back there silently, kind of stoically watching everything.
Really? I didn't notice that. That's funny.
Nah, I'm telling you, family dog.
No matter what happens, you just stand there, drummer.
Yeah. Nobody's trying to save him. Nobody's saying, "Hey, man, we got to get out of here." Do you see the pigeon flambe skewer?
You guys have been talking about Harrison Ford's two-step and things like that. He would often refer to the physical acting, and I think that's what Harrison Ford is truly great at, is these things where they're just little things, little gestures in fights, looks, two steps, as you mentioned, where there's no lines. He's not really given any lines, but the physical acting that he's doing is so good.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the things that made him, such a hugely bankable star for so long. And he would often say too that, okay, Han Solo was written maybe as a 2D character, or Indiana Jones, but since he plays them, the third dimension is him. So
that's a good point.
I think we can't not give him enough credit for, embodying these great characters.
Yeah, definitely.
He's my hero growing up.
Yeah, mine too.
He's really phenomenal.
He's great in this scene too, in this fight scene. Exactly what you said, his body language and even some of his facial gestures.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And when he slaps the first guy in the previous minute, I mean, there's anger in there. It's like the way Sean Connery would punch people as James Bond.
Yeah.
Roger Moore could never punch somebody that way. He just couldn't do it. It's like Sean Connery, you really get the idea that he enjoyed it. There was a bit of and with Harrison Ford, it's more of like a righteousness. And it's great. I don't know where it comes from, but these guys are there's something wonderful about watching them.
What? That's amazing. It is a righteousness. Throughout Raiders too, it's like for some reason, no matter what he's doing, even if it's maybe not that savory, you feel like, well, it's clearly got to be for the better good.
Right.
There's a righteousness in each fist.
Yep.
Cool. On that righteous note, does anybody have anything else about minute 10?
I got nothing.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, this has been awesome having you here, Jonathan. Can you tell people where they can find you online and anything you'd like to tell them about what you're working on again?
Yes, you can find me. I have a website, jwrinsler.com, and you can find me on Twitter at JW Rinsler. And I'm working on a book about Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, and another one about sort of like a visual analysis of Jaws, one of my favorite movies when I was a kid. I don't know when either of these will be out, but I'm hoping in the next year or so.
Excellent.
And you wrote an Indiana Jones book, didn't you? I mean, like a fiction.
Yeah. I had a really great time doing that. It was for Scholastic. I wrote Indiana Jones and the Mystery of Mount Sinai, and I resurrected the villain from Raiders, who was going to have a mechanical arm.
Right. Yeah. He's on the cover. Yeah.
That cover is fantastic.
Yeah, he's on the cover. Yeah. And Greg Knight, who used to work at Lucasfilm and now works for EA, did the illustration for the cover, and we worked closely on it. That was just, the whole thing was a lot of fun. It was fun writing Indy. I got his father is in there in the book, and a lot of fun stuff.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, definitely check it out, everybody. And certainly, if you haven't yet, check out the complete making of Indiana Jones and the making of Star Wars. They are absolutely fantastic. And Tom, can you tell people where they can find us?
No, but Jerry can.
All right. Well, we have 115 episodes where we discuss Raiders of the Lost Ark. If you'd like to check out some of the earlier minutes, you can find that at www.indianajonesminute.com. Also, we're on Facebook. We have a whole listeners crusade where people come and talk about all sorts of things, like what sort of noises cymbals would make, and how dark is really dark when it comes to Temple of Doom, and all sorts of stuff. That's at the Indiana Jones Minute Listeners Crusade. We're also on Twitter at Indiana Jones Min. So find us there and join the discussion.
Yeah, and you can also find us right back here on Monday for minute 11 of the Indiana Jones Minute.
Oh, somebody's got to say something.
I know. What do we yell this time?
The antidote.
Where's the diamond?